Is there a difference between perception and reality? And by the way, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on this question. So if you have a view, by all means, please just leave a comment below. Hi, Lesley Hornsby here. If you've tuned in before, welcome back. And if you're a first timer, then it's great to have you join us. I'm an NLP certified life coach, and my channel focuses on life coaching and demystifying and explaining the beneficial aspects of engaging with NLP to overcome some of the challenges that we face in life. In the meantime, I think the best place for me to start is by exploring what those two words actually mean. So how do we define reality and perception? Well, to unpack that lot is going to require us to step back and spend a little time exploring human behaviour. Essentially, all behaviour is learned one way or another. At the most basic level, our behaviour is driven by an instinctive need to assess the external world and the merits of dangerous versus not dangerous, friend or foe, pleasure or pain. This kind of analysis is ever present and ongoing and very much a part of our DNA. Of course, it's a throwback to a more visceral existence where survival literally depended on choosing the right response to any given situation. You've no doubt heard of fight or flight response, and when we experience it, our bodies react to the stress by flooding us with adrenaline and cortisol. It's also evident that not everyone reacts to every situation in the same way. Your response to things is conditioned over the course of your life, developed and determined by your very unique personal experience and by the influence of those around you. And these influences are derived in a number of ways. The most direct learning behaviours are those that have been actively taught, such as appropriate conditioned response behaviour. For example, you learn to nod to indicate yes and shake your head to mean no. This is a learned behaviour rather than an instinctive one, and you can recognise it as such quite simply because it's not necessarily a universal human behaviour. In countries, for example, such as Egypt, Greece and Bulgaria, the shaking of a head from side to side actually means yes. In Israel, interrupting someone while they're speaking isn't regarded as rude, but instead suggests you're not really listening and aren't engaged with what someone is telling you. And I can think of at least one friend who has apparently embraced that particular cultural norm. So apart from learning a behaviour through actively being taught, we also learn by example, and it's not necessarily intentional. Phobias, for example, are often developed in this way, where you may form the same specific phobia as a parent or older sibling. If they have a severe reaction to something that they fear, this can potentially influence you to feel the same way. Many of us experience phobias of one kind or another, whether it's fear of mice or spiders or snakes, and there are many less obvious ones too. My personal irrational fear is for cockroaches. I wasn't actively taught to be afraid of them. However, back in my childhood, whilst on holiday abroad, I can remember both my parents, in particular my mum, reacting very strongly to a cockroach that scurried across the floor of our hotel room. And one of those nice big juicy black ones that can fly, by the way. Witnessing my mum's fear, her behaviour and reaction back then almost certainly conditioned my fear of cockroaches. And now, every cockroach encounter since has triggered a reaction that has me shrieking like a banshee, jumping on furniture, and basically fleeing the room as if my life depended on it. On the other hand, neither of my parents, or anyone else I can think of, to be honest, showed fear of other creatures that tend to incite phobias, such as mice or snakes. And although, yeah, I'm wary of them, I don't have any great fear, and certainly not the extreme reaction that I have to cockroaches. So you may very well be thinking at this point, what's all this to do with perception and reality? Well, essentially it provides a bit of insight on just how little autonomy we have over our developing perceptions of the world. We depend on our constant assessment of dangerous and not dangerous, friend or foe, and the rest. And in turn, that informs a great deal of how we interpret the world. Of course, our fears nowadays are less about mortal danger and more about coping with the stresses of modern life. Situations of high stress provoke the same physical and mental changes that you experience when your primal fear response is triggered. This can be anything from feeling anxious about a job interview, sitting an exam, or just feeling sick because you're in trouble at work. Stress is a chain reaction. At the onset of a stressful event, the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that contributes to processing emotions, that sends a distress signal to your hypothalamus. And that's the area of the brain that channels and communicates with the rest of your body through your nervous system. The distress signal causes your adrenal gland to fire up, and that in turn creates that fight or flight response. This fight or flight response causes the outward physical reactions that most people associate with stress, including increased heart rate, could be heightened senses, a deeper intake of oxygen, and a rush of adrenaline. Finally, a hormone called cortisol is released, and that's produced to restore the energy lost in that response. Cortisol's function is part of the natural process of the body, and in addition to restoring the balance of the body after a stressful event, it also helps regulate blood sugar levels in your cells. These physiological reactions are unwanted and unhelpful, but we feel unable to prevent them. Your subconscious mind takes its cue from cultivated beliefs based on past experiences, or sometimes what you've been led to believe. It's as if your mind is accessing your memories and saying something like, yeah, well, I can see that you're going to present to your colleagues, aren't you? And I can tell that you're not sure how they're going to react, and I'm sensing anxiety here. Clearly this means that you're in danger, so now I'm going to release all those chemicals that you need to get yourself out of this perilous situation. And as your brain secretes away, it's telling your body to gear up for a punch up or a quick getaway. And what's really important in a life or death scenario in this situation now becomes very, very debilitating, as it's not a life-threatening situation and it's unproductive. And it potentially can have the opposite effect of what was intended and end up sabotaging you instead. Nerves and self-sabotage, well, they're a nightmare, aren't they? So what can you do about it? Which takes me back to our original question. It's clear that your mind needs a little direction. As I've described, left to its own devices, it can provoke interesting responses that you might not appreciate. The fact is that it's not so much that there's a difference between perception and reality, just that the mind doesn't really know the difference. So let me put this into context for you. I'm going to describe something to you, and I'd like you to actively access your 5 senses as I go. We'll go step by step so that you have time to experience your response before we move on to the next stage. As we progress, picture and imagine yourself doing the things that I describe. Okay, so you're standing in a kitchen and someone hands you a whole lemon. As you hold it, it rests comfortably in your palm. Take a moment and imagine its shape and colour and think about its zesty freshness. Now begin to feel the weight of the lemon. Notice the texture of its skin and its temperature in your hand. Is it cool or warm? In your other hand, you are holding a knife. Take the knife and you're going to gently slice the lemon in two. The lemon is going to begin to leak its cool juice over your fingers. And now visualize lifting one of the halves of the lemon and holding it close enough to your nose so that you can smell it. Once you've breathed in the scent, gently squeeze a drop of the lemon's juice onto your tongue and taste the citrus. Okay, so that's it. Now take a moment to reflect on that experience. Did your body have any physiological reaction to your visualization and thoughts? I'm guessing, unless of course you've never tasted lemon juice before, that you may well have had any number of responses, not least, I suspect, one that stimulated your saliva glands. Despite the fact that a real lemon might be miles away, through the process of focusing your thoughts and memories of past experience, you prompt a real physical response to an imaginary lemon. Mind and body are so in tune that you can't consider one without the other. Let's look at some other examples of you allowing your brain to perceive reality where none exists. So I'm wondering, have you ever been in a situation in your life when your emotions were stirred and you had a real tangible physiological response to something when you actually knew it wasn't real? For example, what about when you're in a movie theatre watching, say, a thriller? Do you remember yourself maybe poised on the edge of your seat, or your heart pounding, or your eyes wide and your breath suspended? Or maybe you were swept away by a tragic romance and tears filling your eyes. That's a big one for me, despite knowing that what you're seeing is actually make-believe. The thing is that the brain doesn't need real to believe. Our perception is a fluid and malleable thing. we're able to project our own realities onto the fictional, drawing on a vast reserve of memories and experiences that make up the sum of our lives and our individuality. Think about a time, for example, when you decided to plan a holiday. What's the first thing that happened? Didn't you begin imagining yourself there? Did you think about how warm the sun would be on your skin, how the silky scratch of the sand would feel between your toes? And what other senses were roused as you looked at your mental tour of this dreamed of holiday? We experience our world through our five senses, and just as we feel, see, hear real life, we also draw upon that when visualising the future. As we visualise, we experience, and the brain, when it comes to emotion and senses, makes no distinction. And so we come to the real question of why all this matters. Understanding that our brain responds to the signals you give it opens up all kinds of opportunities. For example, what if you struggle with a lack of self-confidence? Couldn't you use this principle to your own advantage? Wouldn't it be great to capture the very essence of pleasant, positive feelings whenever you want? And the good news is that you can. In the world of NLP, we refer to this as changing state, and there are fantastic techniques that you can use and draw on to do just that. The mind is very obedient. It really does give us what we ask for and what we concentrate on. When there's no difference between what is received and what is real, then it demonstrates that our brain is responding to what we notice and what we focus on. Think about someone describing your favourite meal. Do your senses immediately start to kick in? Do you start to feel hungry when a moment ago it hadn't crossed your mind? Or believe you can almost smell the food? This kind of detailed visualisation can have as much of a physical effect on you as the real thing. Our behaviour and responses to situations is modelled and often set in a repetitive cycle by the values and beliefs that we hold about ourselves and the world around us. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Imagine, for example, as a child of 6, say, you were ridiculed because you found reading difficult. And it was only in later life that you were diagnosed as dyslexic. The anxiety and hurt you felt may likely become synonymous with places of learning. Rather than looking forward to going to school, you come to dread it. The association is formed, and now fast forward to your adult life and you find yourself back in a learning environment. Without necessarily understanding the root cause, the old feelings of anxiety and fear resurface, potentially sabotaging this new learning opportunity. So what can you do about it? Well, let's consider then what you can do to re-educate your brain. To achieve this kind of re-education, there is an incredibly effective NLP technique called disassociation. Achieving disassociation in NLP is basically a revision of a relationship that you have with a memory so that it becomes unattached to you in feeling or critical importance. Essentially, you learn to modify the memory and break the emotional associations it carries. Applied to the previous scenario, it would mean that by mastering this technique, it would enable you to develop a de-stressed and more positive response to a learning situation. Just understanding that you actually do have mastery over your brain and thoughts if you choose, irrespective of whether it's based on real or imagined worlds, it gives you dominion over the sometimes unhelpful automatic emotional responses that you have. The gift of the NLP techniques is that it doesn't require you to endlessly rehash the agony of a memory, but allows you to remove yourself from the negativity that you associate with that part of your life. Today, we've briefly delved into the workings of the human mind, how it makes little distinction between perception and reality. What is significant to understand is that what individuals believe about reality and their awareness of their world, your map, if you will, is not reality itself or a complete picture of everything happening, known in NLP as the territory. Our subjective perception of reality is filtered many times by our brain, and therefore two people can experience the same event differently. Our map of the territory can be different even though the territory itself is the same. I hope you have enjoyed this video and it's whetted your appetite to know more, because understanding yourself is the first step in deciding who you want to be and how to become the best version of yourself. To join me again next time, hit subscribe when I'll be talking about life coaching, what it is and how it can help you get the best traction on your life so that you can begin to chart your own course. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.